Welcome to the Heritage Support Grants Program webinar, which will provide an overview of HSG project grants. My name is Bryce Gorman, and I'm an educator for local history services at the Indiana Historical Society. This webinar is part of the Indiana Historical Society's Heritage Support Grants Program, made possible by Lilly Endowment Incorporated. Here's an overview of some of what we're going to cover in this webinar. The first objective is to provide the project grant program, looking at the full online grant application process. This webinar will also work to clarify questions that appear on the HSG application. Let's start with that program overview. This will help you understand the purpose and structure of our grants, as well as our funding priorities and eligibility requirements. Project grants range from $5,000 to $50,000. They require a 15% cash match, as well as 100% board support. Board support can include financial support or volunteer hours. Both of these will be covered later on in this webinar. The project grants have a multi-part process, which can take several months to move from initial inquiry to grant award. The first step is the summary of proposal here. The summary of proposal is a bit of a executive review. It's the initial inquiry phase. It's similar to a letter of intent or an executive summary that many of you might have seen in other grant programs. This allows organizations the opportunity to provide a brief synopsis of their project's need, solution, and expected outcome. It also provides organizational background information and helps the review committee understand whether the organization is ready to take on the project. A summary proposal is required in order to be considered for a project grant. If, after reviewing the summary of proposal, your committee feels that the project meets all the HSG objectives and the funding requirements eligibility, you will be invited to the full proposal. So the full proposal will be due approximately 2 months after the summary of proposal deadline. The default project timeline for a project grant is going to be 12 months. Grantees are going to have a year to finish the grant project. You can certainly finish the project in less than 12 months, but your timeline should not be for more than that year. The total turnaround time on this grant is approximately 4 months after the summary proposal deadline to grant award. So I hope that this flow chart can provide you a little bit of context for how the project grants are awarded. Let's look into some of the guidelines. In order to be eligible, an organization has to be incorporated in the state of Indiana as a 501c3. They have to have an annual budget under $300,000, and they must reflect history as a significant component of their mission and or propose a history-focused project. A history-focused project is one that's going to interpret, present, or disseminate a historical narrative. It tells a historical story or provides useful historical information. Building and landscape projects will be considered if the project is if the building or landscape is primarily used to facilitate historical interpretation, or if it houses a significant historical collection. Organizations that operate under a larger parent organization can be eligible through a friends group or a nonprofit fiscal sponsor, as long as the friends group meets the eligibility criteria. If this pertains to you, I would urge you to watch the General HSG Overview webinar for more details on friends groups. The funding priorities are intentionally broad. Organizations have so many different priorities and needs, and we want to be as impactful as possible with the HSG grants. We have identified 4 broad areas for our funding priorities. Projects should fit into collection stewardship. These projects address storage, management, and conservation of collections and associated documentation entrusted to the organization's care. This might include historic objects, structures, or landscapes as part of the collections care. Diversity, equity, access, and inclusion, DEAI, These projects focus on efforts to ensure that diverse individuals fully participate in all aspects of organizational work. They broaden organizations beyond public accommodations and work to achieve genuine inclusion. Sustainability projects focus on identifying and accessing internal and external resources the organization needs to achieve goals and improve sustainability. These projects meet the needs of the present without compromising its ability to meet future needs. Finally, there's planning. Planning projects identify organizational objectives and assess organizational capacity. So I hope this provides you a little bit of guidance on HSG priorities and the eligibility. So let's move here into the grant portal. If you have, if you have any questions about um, whether your project fits our funding priorities, please feel free to contact me or your coach. You can watch the HSG overview. There are several expenses that are not eligible for HSG funding. These would include rent, mortgage, utilities, insurance, permanent staff salaries, items for resale, building purchase, or retiring organizational debt. These are not eligible. And if you have any questions, again, please contact me or your coach. So let's move to the grant portal. If you once you've registered in the grant portal, um, you can see this screen here. If you have any problems with registering, again, please contact me. And you will see in the home screen once you've logged in, start a project grant or start a mini grant. For our purposes, we will start the project grant, which is circled in red. I do recommend that anyone who starts an application, first save your work often. It is always important if your power goes out, if your internet goes out, if there's some kind of little glitch, you want to have a backup. So it's good to save, and it's good to copy and paste your answers onto a separate Word document. So that's just something that is helpful for everybody. The first step within the project grant process is the summary of proposal. This is going to provide the review committee an overview of your project need, solution, and the anticipated results. Projects that meet eligibility requirements and funding priorities will be invited to submit a full proposal. The full proposal is going to be a more detailed application, which we will discuss afterwards. So let's go into each of these items. The first sections of the summary include important details about your project. The project overview theme. In the overview section, you will provide the title, total requested grant amount. It's common for organizations to request the highest amount available when applying for a grant. We suggest that you want to request the amount you need. This might be the upper level of the allowed request. Sometimes it's not. Heritage support grants are very competitive. We want to help as many organizations as possible. And for this reason, please do not pad your budget. Please do not piece together several projects for one proposal. These are going to decrease your chances of receiving funding. The project overview also asks for a start and end date. Each round of grants has an established start date, and the default end date will be 12 months for project grants. You can move that date up if you do not anticipate the project is going to take the entire 12 months, and there's no penalty for completing a project early. The project team section, we just need information about the name and contact information for the project manager. This person will be responsible for overseeing and reporting on the project. So they'll be our main point of contact. We also ask for the name, title, contact information if possible, for anyone who is completing the grant application if they are not the project manager. And we also want to hear about project team members, staff, or volunteers, and their pertinent qualifications. So this information is just going to give the review committee more context for who's working on this project and their qualifications to succeed. Once the project details have been outlined, it's time to get into the narrative. So the project narrative is going to be the heart of the summary or proposal. We're going to spend a little bit of time on each of the questions in the project narrative section. We'll go over the project summary, co-sponsors, managing the funds, ownership of the building. So the project narrative should provide a preview of the project and serve as an executive summary. You want to provide enough information to demonstrate that you have a logical plan to address a critical need and the resources necessary to put that plan into action without funding from a grant. Review committee members are looking for confirmation that your project meets eligibility requirements as well as funding requirements. You want to make sure that the narrative is thorough. Keep in mind this is not the full grant application though. If you're invited to submit a full proposal, you will have time to expand on your plans. So keep the summary concise. The first question in the narrative section addresses the project summary. This is designed to be a concise summary of your project. Use the space to talk about the need your organization has identified, your proposed solution, and the intended results of the project. As you consider how you want to describe the project, it's helpful to think in terms of need, results, and solution. First, your need has to be compelling. You want to convince reviewers that it's a situation undeniably worth addressing. Next, you want to identify a solution. The planned work. It has to be logical and realistic. Reviewers are able to see that your solution clearly addresses the need or problem you've described. Finally, make sure that the results address the need you've presented. If you're trying to affect change by addressing the need or problem, you want to make sure the end state of your project does that. Remember that your organization exists to serve the public, so be sure to frame outcomes in terms of people who will benefit from it. Always focus on people, not things, when discussing the impact of your project. Here's some of the additional questions in the narrative section that we should look at briefly. The first is a question about co-sponsors and partners. Partners are those who've contributed something substantial to the development of your project. For this reason, IHS would not be considered a partner if it receives HSG funding because IHS had no hand in the development of the project. Not every project will be a partnership. Many will, or they could be. Good relationships with community partners contribute to sustainability, so consider whether there are opportunities to engage with others on your project. If you've identified partners or co-sponsors, make sure to account for their role in your description of the project. We advise organizations to get letters of support or a letter of understanding from these partners to confirm that everyone is on board and on the same page with this project. The next question about building ownership. Organizations are not required to own their building. They're not even required to have a building in order to apply for a grant. However, if the grant project proposes changes to a building, there are some things the review committee will want to see addressed. If an organization doesn't own their building, the committee will want to see evidence that the building owner has approved of and supports the proposed changes to that building. For example, if your county owns the building out of which you operate, the reviewers, they're going to want to see a letter or some confirmation that you have their approval to implement the proposed changes. Similarly, organizations should address any easements or covenants placed on the building. Reviewers, they are going to look at lease terms when considering any of these building changes. So if your organization has a year-to-year lease, the case does become less compelling than if they had a longer lease agreement. The final question in this section deals with how the organization will manage grant funds. Reviewers look for confirmation that the organization operates under a system of checks and balances, and that financial information is available to and approved by the board of directors. They also want to see that the organization has a process in place that allows them to track specific funds and ensure funds are only used for the project. Organizations must be able to present proper documentation of spending at any point during the grant cycle award if they're requested to do so. There are several questions about your organization's fundraising capacity. Although the review committees may look at this information to determine if your organization has experience managing grants, we primarily use this information for our own data collection purposes so that we can better understand the extent to which organizations are doing fundraising on their own. We only ask that you answer them to the best of your ability. You will not be penalized if you have never written a grant application prior to this. This will complete the summary of proposal. So once you've answered these questions, they will move on to the review committee. The review committee will look for eligibility, fundraising priorities. They will make sure that it fits. And then if they deem that it does, you will be invited for the full proposal. As a reminder, organizations are required to submit the summary proposal before they're invited for a full proposal. When you log into the online grant portal to begin a project grant application, you're only going to see the summary of proposal questions. The rest of the application, the full proposal, is made available once the summary of proposal has been reviewed and an invitation to submit your full application has been extended. You can find a blank grant proposal, the full proposal, on the resources page of the HSG website. So the sections we're going to cover: institutional readiness, evidence of need, project logic, implementation, evaluation, sustainability, the attachments, and the budget. Institutional readiness is where you can provide evidence of your organization's capacity to successfully carry out the project. You want to prove to grant reviewers that this is the right time and place for this project. A brief summary of your organization's history and accomplishments can help the reviewers draw parallels between your past successes and the current project. Other factors you may want to mention include personnel, paid and volunteer, along with their qualifications that contribute to the success of the project. If your staff and volunteers have taken advantage of any special training or assessments, or if they use professional standards or best practices, you want to mention this as well. Your current programs, services, and activities may help reviewers understand how the project fits into the organization's mission. It's helpful to provide reviewers an understanding of your organization's role in the community and how, in turn, the community supports you. You may find that you need to include specific information based on the project you're proposing. Collections projects, they may require additional information about your collections management policy, accession process, storage capacity. Building projects, they may require more in-depth information about facilities, structures. You might want to request a historic structures report. When trying to figure out what to include in the institutional readiness section, what background information will be helpful to reviewers as they attempt to determine the likelihood of a successful implementation of the project you're proposing. In the summary proposal, you gave reviewers an overview of the need you want to address. The evidence of need section allows you to expand on that idea and provide fact-based evidence to persuade reviewers that the need should be met through your proposed solutions. Make sure you have completely defined the situation or the problem and provide context. So reviewers understand so the reviewers understand how this affects your organization and by extension your community. You may want to approach this by talking about what could happen if this need is not met. You will also want to touch on how this situation even came to be, explain the cause and effect of the need, and describe how that need was determined. Use objective evidence to bolster your case. The project logic section is your opportunity to go into greater detail about the planned work and intended results in the you introduced in the project summary section of the summary proposal. It's strongly recommended that applicants use the project model template as a tool to help inform the narrative in this section. We offer a blank logic model template on the HSG website. It's again, it's on the resources page. The logic model template helps you break down the project into 6 different sections and provides an opportunity to consider how the pieces of the project come together. A logic model is divided into planned work, objectives, inputs, activities, and intended results, which are your outputs, outcomes, and impact. The project logic section of the application it's critical because it provides a framework for your proposal to reviewers. The implementation section is where you're going to illustrate exactly how the project will be accomplished. In a time, reviewers want to see that you've identified critical milestones in the project and that you've built in specific indicators that will help you gauge whether you're progressing with a project as anticipated. This is a good space to talk about the roles and responsibilities of individuals on the project team and to identify who's responsible for monitoring the success of the project. Evaluation is the way you track and measure the changes you observe that come as a result of your project activities. We often tend to think of evaluation in academic terms, but we feel that we just don't have the knowledge or resources to do it, quote, the right way, end quote. The fact is that by putting even a few tracking measures in place, small organizations can collect information that can be very useful to improving programs and processes. The goal is to put a system into place that allows for continuous feedback. No organization can track everything. So you need to prioritize what you will measure for this project. So when you're setting priorities, consider these 2 questions. 1, what information do you need to know to make decisions? And 2, how can you best collect and understand that information using the resources available to you? As you start working on your project evaluation, remember that it's not a test you can fail. Evaluation is a tool. The right way to do it is the way that allows you to collect useful information that will allow you to make informed decisions about how to improve the work you do. It's okay to start small and build from there. There are many different definitions and interpretations of sustainability. For the purposes of the HSG program, reviewers want to see how this project impacts long-term goals. Will successful completion of this project set the organization up for greater capacity to take important steps? Is the project important to the continued momentum of the larger goal? Are the project outputs, a catalog collection, watertight building, new educational curriculum, are they going to contribute to the organization's sustainability or growth? How might the success of this project improve your ability to attract and diversify your funding? Does it make your organization more attractive to donors and funders? Does it open doors to building and nurturing relationships with new and existing supporters? The budget justification section of your grant application should correspond with the project budget, which we will discuss shortly. This question exists to explain your expenses with enough details to justify the inclusion in the project. The template includes a spot for notes, but the justification section is where you should provide most of the details about your income and expenses. Use it to show how calculations were made. It's important to follow the same order as in the itemized template, just for reviewers' sake. And double check that everything in the budget template, budget justification, and proposal narrative all match up. So the project grants require a 15% cash match. These matching funds must come from new fundraising, and it needs to be actual dollars. It can't come from in-kind donations like use of space or volunteer hours, and it cannot come from cost sharing. For anyone unfamiliar with cost sharing, this is where an applicant contributes resources like staff time or equipment to a sponsored project. These funds should not come from the organization's general or rainy day funds. So, one of the components of HSG is fundraising education. So it is important that organizations match 15% of the funding through new fundraising. So let's go into a quick example. The 15% match is calculated in addition to your total grant request. So for example, if you request $10,000, the cash match would be $1,500. And the project total from the grant and the cash match would be $11,500. You do have an extended timeline in which to secure the cash match. You can start fundraising up to 4 months before the summary proposal deadline, and you have until the end of the grant cycle to finish. You will want to document the sources of your match in your final report, so please track your fundraising. Your organization may look at several possible sources of matching funds. Could come from the current donor base, community interest in the project, and availability of corporate sponsorship, maybe an opportunity to leverage with other grants. Many organizations undertake project-specific fund drives by mailing appeals to their donors or including the community in a public campaign. Or other organizations have a few donors who are willing to provide their individual support to the project in the form of major gifts. Some organizations host special events or designate that funds raised at a recurring annual event will be used for the project. And still other organizations secure additional grants and can sometimes leverage an HSG grant to receive additional funding through a matching grant. We highly recommend maintaining a strong relationship with your community foundation. Community foundations can be important partners in the local grant making process and serve as vital resources for education as well as funding. As you decide how to approach the cash match, make sure you and your board have a clear picture of your fundraising options. Consider the first steps necessary. Are relationships already in place? Are there already lines of communication open? Does the organization have resources available to launch this method? What other considerations are at play? What are the pros and cons of each approach? It may take some time, it may take some thought and good communications to decide on the right fundraising strategy. Some organizations are further along with fundraising than others, and that's okay. If you're looking to take your fundraising to the next level, you may want to attend one of our fundraising basics workshops coming up in the next few months. In addition, you can always contact me. Options. That's what we're here for. During the evaluation of the first Heritage Support Grant phase, it was found that organizations with higher board participation led to long-term growth and success. IHS determined that the requirement of 100% board support would meet the need of higher board participation, while at the same time offering board members flexibility in whether they wanted to invest their time or money. Project grants require 100% board support in the organization. The board support can be financial contributions, volunteer time, or a combination of the two. If you have any thoughts, questions, anything about how to approach your own board, please contact me. You can contact Tamara Himmerline. We are here to provide you with help with any board training you might need. The final section of the project grant application is the additional documents. This section calls for a mix of required and optional documents. The required documents include the organization's annual budget, the project budget on the HSG template, a list of current board members, and a copy of your IRS tax determination letter. Please note the tax determination letter is not your state's sales tax exemption letter. This is the letter your organization received from the IRS to confirm your 501c3 status. Your organization's annual budget can come in whatever form your board has approved for the organization's use. You do not have to use a specific template or a report for this. The board list and all their affiliations, we ask for that because honestly, it's an advantage to the organization. Your board members are your advocates and should be your greatest champions. It's important to know who they are and how they're connected to your community. Their affiliations can include social, professional, or philanthropic responsibilities. And this is useful information when your organization is looking for specific expertise or networking. We also want to make sure that everyone's following best practices. If your organization will be applying under a friends group, you will be required to supply a letter from the parent organization confirming the parent organization supports the project and application. It also has to confirm there's a member of the friends group on the project team, and the grant funding will be held by the friends group. Some of the optional documents include up to 2 letters of support, and any additional documents you think will help strengthen your case. These might include contractor quotes, before photos, design plans, or a variety of other materials. It is highly recommended that if you have a specific project that is noting deterioration in, say, a building or an item, that there are some pictures and that there's supporting evidence on why this process is the necessary one. So while they are optional, they are highly recommended. Please be judicious in selecting your attachments, though. You do not want to fatigue reviewers by adding unnecessary documents. Choose the ones that are going to help strengthen your case the most. If you intend to include letters of support, please note that reviewers want to see letters that specifically address this grant project. Support letters from other grant applications or awards packages, it won't really do you any favors, and in some cases it'll make reviewers wonder if the grant application process was not important enough to ask for new letters. They want to see letters from partners, co-sponsors, particularly when the project requires their participation. Another source for letters could be from someone who's very familiar with your services or this project, maybe a participant or a member or even a visitor. So I mentioned organizational budget in the previous slide. The HSG applications require that you attach your organization's annual budget. This can come in whatever form your board has approved for the organization's use. You don't have to use the HSG budget template. You are welcome to do so if you like. If your organization does not have an annual budget, this is something you want to discuss quickly with your coach. This is a required document, and your coach will work with you to figure out how to develop that budget. We require the annual budget because it helps reviewers better understand your organization. It speaks to your financial solvency, and it helps reviewers put the project in the perspective of how it fits in your overall operations. This is the budget form required for all grant applications, mini and project. It's also the form required for end of grant reporting. Please note this budget is separate from the organization budget discussed in the previous slide. This ensures that all applicants use the same form and the same information. It makes it so much easier for reviewers. You can download this Excel file from the HSG website under the resources page, but it is also available on the attached documents as a link. You'll notice that there are three different sections: income, expenses, and balance. Um, and The template has a couple formulas built in, and it'll automatically calculate the 15% match on the second line. This will be your cash match amount. The project budget provides a line item account of expenses and income. So a good budget is detailed, tracked, and changed. It's detailed enough to needed information for the but also for the project team. This can include using descriptions, unit numbers and prices, or specific item numbers or colors, things like that. And when I say tracked and change, I'm specifically talking about how to use your budget during your project. Ideally, you'll submit your budget numbers, which they're just estimates, and then as you incur each expense through the course of your project, you'll update the budget with the actual numbers. So let's look at income first. In this section, you're going to include all money coming in from this project, for this project. First and foremost, first line will include heritage support grants. Put in the request in the budgeted column, be around here. And in other lines under income, you'll include the cash match, money that's already in hand, any other fundraising you need to do, any resources that you intend to put in towards it. The total income amount should equal the total expense amount. So moving to the expenses, this is where you're going to list all anticipated expenses by line item. At this point, you're only using the budgeted column, highlighted in the yellow. Leave the actual column, the one next to it, the actual column blank. Until you actually receive heritage support funding and actually incur in any expenses. You want to pay attention to the balance section at the bottom. We are looking for a projected balance of 0. Your expenses and income from the project should be the same. I do want to say something quickly about contingency funds. There are some projects that can reasonably include a 5 to 10% contingency, just in case funds. This is specifically true, especially true of some building projects or those that are weather dependent. If you're not sure whether you should include contingency funds, talk to your coach. We do realize that budgets can change. Something doesn't go the way you anticipated, either good or bad, and you end up having to reallocate. If your grant is funded and you find yourself in this situation, please work with your coach. Any changes over 10% of your total grant will require a formal request for a reallocation. But again, that is something your coach can help you with down the road. The project budget can only include direct costs. It cannot include indirect costs, overhead, facilities, administrative expenses, utilities, or salaries for permanent staff. Before you hit the submit button, please review all the attached documents and ensure the required documents are in place and everything is readable. It's good practice to share the draft with a colleague. A second set of eyes might spot an issue that you just didn't. And it's a good idea to print your final copy for reference. Once your application has been submitted, it'll move from the drafts folder to the submitted application folder. You'll no longer be able to edit the form, but you can print it from this screen. Finally, be aware of the submission due date. Applicants will not be accepted late. Although it might be tempting to gloss over this question, I recommend that you give it some thought. Our grant program is very competitive and we always have more in requests than we have in money to award. For this reason, reviewers often have to make difficult decisions. When the committee considers applications that are on the fringe of getting funded, those with phase projects or those that are clear how partial funding would be used are more likely to receive funding than proposals that don't give a clear indication of how partial funding would be allotted. In addition, the review panel wants to see that the organization does in fact have a plan B and that they can prioritize the parts of the project that are most critical or must come first. In addition to your coach, who is assigned when you register on the grant portal, you can also contact any member of the grant team if you have any questions or need additional information. Our information is right here. There's myself and Tamara. Um, I appreciate you so much for taking the time to learn more about the Heritage Support Grants, project grants, and I hope that you'll join us for future training opportunities. Thank you so much and best of luck to all of you.